Looks like all you EBT holders, if you want to go in and take shit that you think is yours. Good luck, because chances are you'll never get EBT again.
Nothing says make America great again like preying on the downfall of millions of your fellow hardworking Americans who you are closer to than the ruling class. I guess this is what winning looks like. So as of this recording, the government-funded program Snap and WIC are going to run out of money in 2 days. And hopefully that does change, like there's some last-minute decision of Trump deciding to put the money that he can put into it and is kind of obligated to put into it, but obviously I can't look into the future. But with that, I'm gonna start this off with an anecdotal story, as I tend to do, because this entire situation has been bothering me, as it's a situation about people, greed of the wealthy, and well, the failure of the social contract, which I kind of spoke on before when it regards to Gen Z. So getting into this, from 2017 to 2022, I was effectively homeless. I was a homeless university student. My family got evicted my first month into moving to my university. And with that, I couch surfed, stayed at friends, lived in extended stays, hotels, motels, and whatnot, because I was putting all my money towards that because I wasn't going to quit or give up. And while I graduated and everything, this isn't about my graduation as much about the people that I met when I was doing that. I met a bunch of people when I was living those extended stays and hotels and whatnot. I met people that were your typical drug addicts like the Republicans and others who use the bootstrap narrative like to demonize. I met people who had just given up on life. They were given a bad hand after bad hand after bad hand. And some people, you get beat on so much, you eventually give up. I met other people who were working full time and just couldn't afford where they lived anymore. So they were like, hey man, I'm gonna let all this go, stay in this cheap motel, and make my way back up. I met some people who just couldn't afford rent, who got the price of living became too expensive and whatnot. They got evicted. I met others who are in situations where they got divorced, and divorces can be expensive and messy, as well as others who were in domestic violence relationships and were put there because they were in a program, but they also worked full time. And I say that because some of these people worked part time and some of these people worked full time. So some of these people were on Snap, and others, like the woman named Jessie, she was on WIC because she got pregnant. However, she had a job. She worked. In fact, a little side story about Jessie. Jessie had AAA, and one time she had told me when I had finally got my car, she said, if I ever need to use her AAA, I can use it. And lo and behold, one day I had to use it because the car didn't have a splash shield under it. I hit something and it cracked the oil case, and oil was spilling everywhere. I was couldn't drive the car. The engine would have seized. What I'm trying to say here is things weren't the typical demonization and whatnot. And in fact, there was like a little sense of a community at the one extended stay I was at, where the people, Jessie and the other person, I'm gonna name her Beth. Beth worked full time. Beth actually was one person who was in a domestic violence situation, who then ended up like getting divorced and was in the process of getting divorced, as well as, while she was working and dealing with that, she had a medical emergency and started losing her hair. Like, just things were happening to her that was just like, damn, but she was still working. And people like her and people like Jessie and whatnot are people that use Snap and WIC and things because that program has about 40 million Americans on it. So if you're new here, from 2023 to 2025, I decided to start living on my car. I graduated from school, started making money and whatnot, but I had some life situations that happened where I hit my F it moment and just wanted peace and quiet. And that's what that situation did. But one thing I started talking about while doing that is like the things I saw, not just like the peace I was getting from being away from society and whatnot, but the experiences that I had before in the hotels and motels and things, and seeing people who ended up living out their cars as well, but because they couldn't afford it anymore. Like there was, in the one extended stay, there was an older lady who eventually got kicked out because she couldn't afford it anymore. And basically the only thing she had left was that car. And when I was living out the car and crashing in a Walmart parking lots and all the other places, I would see people just like that lady. I would see others, I would get to recognize the trends and habits and how they had their vehicles, and notice, oh, there actually is a bigger amount of people that live out their vehicles, and that's why I started speaking on the reality of car life or van life, whatnot, and the fact that it's not just this pretty trendy thing to do. It's something a lot of Americans are doing because they don't have money. So when I see things like the TikTok video I put in the beginning, and just the way people's lives are being used and abused and whatnot, it makes me, quite frankly, it makes me angry. Just like how it makes me angry when I'm on Facebook and whatnot and I see the common person, the best part of the MAGA cult, excuse this behavior by saying, well, you know, some of the benefits were going to illegal. So that's your justification to ruining the lives of your fellow man. Some ruining your own lives, because as we know by now, some of the people who argue for this stuff are also the people being affected by it, but they have so much, you know, cognitive dissonance and are so deep into the cult that they don't really see how they're hurting themselves. Like, I get angry when I see that. I don't care the fact that there are some people who don't have the right legal status that are getting some benefits. And although that's not the case, even if it was, do those people not pay sales tax and contribute to the other taxes that they can't even benefit from that helps our society keep running? Yes, it does. The same taxes that are going to Argentina, Israel, and that stupid ass fucking ballroom. In fact, even as I talk about this right now, I feel my blood beginning to boil because it pisses me off so much. But here's one thing I've been wondering over the last several years, and that's what is the end game to all this? As you know, people can't afford their homes anymore. The cost of living is going up. Wealth inequality, the divide is so, you know, it has grown exponentially. People can't afford their student loans. People can't afford their homes. They can't afford their cars. People can't afford groceries now. As you know, greed and greedflation and everything just continues to skyrocket. I've always wondered, what is the end game of all of this? And seeing this situation going on kind of dawned on me. It kind of like the light bulb went off. And the end game is a society of indentured servants. Now, I know that sounds like super conspiratorial and everything, and I don't really have a way to prove it or whatnot, but I can't help but correlate all this into a avalanche of neo-feudalism, us returning back to the peasant class and whatnot, because what happens when people are struggling, when they can't afford their food, when they can't afford their way of living? What happens? Crime happens. Crime goes up. I know this. If you're watching this, you probably know this. They definitely know this. And with crime comes more policing, more prison. There's a video I recently watched on here about a woman talking about her time working in manual labor. And one thing she said is when she was a kid, she worked as, I believe it's a cotton threader. And with that, you know, she was one of the few people that was actually getting paid as a kid or young teen doing it, because the other kids that were there, they were there on community service through juvie. So you had teenagers who ended up in the criminal justice system for one reason or another that were working for free for a for-profit company. Something that is allowed under the 13th Amendment, which is a topic of discussion that I've seen in passing over the last decade and a half or so of people bringing up on how slavery never really ended. Now, being a black person who's very left-leaning and whatnot, the topic of slavery, Jim Crow, and all that is something that's very integral and important to me, especially because I had some family that lived through it that are deceased and others who lived through the civil rights movement that are still alive. But seeing this and correlating it to what's happening, it's not hard to start going, they're probably going to start using the 13th Amendment as a way to get free labor out of the more people who are going to start committing crimes because they can't afford anything anymore. And that's what I mean by the failure of the social contract. Ideally, the whole point of society was that we all as people got together and we created a set of rules and circumstances that we all were going to abide by, live by, that everybody upon our future generations sign off on, even though they have no idea about it. And with that, you know, we contribute to society. We go by the set of rules. You know, if you don't abide by the set of rules, you could go to jail, you could go to prison, whatnot. But in our case, you know, we pay taxes. We try to be good community members. We do all the so-called right things. And yet, doing all the right things has gotten everybody what? This bullshit that is happening right now. But the thing about this bullshit is this bullshit existed in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, the 1800s, 1700s, 1600s, yada, yada, yada. But speaking of America, we had hit that so-called golden age around the 50s and 60s, thanks to the things like the GI Bill and whatnot, stuff that we weren't really allowed to get. My family didn't get that, even though they served in World War II as well as World War I. But once again, that's neither here nor there. But as time progressed, the bullshit didn't affect women as much as it did, thanks to stuff like the suffrage movement. But it still affected us, blacks and minorities. That includes Native Americans, Chinese, and everybody else. But here's the problem now. This current bullshit doesn't just affect us anymore. because of that wealth divide that I just talked about, that middle class has slowly become an expanded poor class, an expanded working class, an expanded I can't really get by class. And that expanded class has become so big that you could kind of call it a club now. A really big club that's getting beat down by a smaller club that are in a big club because we're not in it, but they hold all the wealth. So when I see people like in the beginning who are ostracizing and gloating and enjoying the suffering of people that is going to happen, I hope they understand they're in this really big club. And when the shit hits the fan, you're not going to be accepted as one of the elite. And that's the video. I don't really have a solution for this topic besides voting, protesting, and fighting like hell. Because, like I said, I've been thinking about that little 13th Amendment and stuff, and it's like, this has to be the solution, you know? It has to be. Because they know crime is going to increase in things. And it got to be, especially with the expansion of ICE and whatnot, you know, the super over militarization of ICE, FBI, and I guess local police. That's the only thing that really makes sense. But whether that is the case or whether it isn't the case, it's ugly out here, and you got to do something. But that's the video. I hope you're all good. Like I said, we're all going through things. I am personally going through a lot right now. People I've talked to on TikTok, on here on this platform, people that I've seen some of my videos and like hit me up on Instagram, and people I just speak to in person. You know, they've been sharing their stories of what they've been going through, and it's like, we're in for a fight. That's all I really got to say. But as always, love y'all. See you on the next one, and deuces.